Hello and welcome to iWizard. Today we're going to be talking about Demon in White, Book 3 of the Sun Eater series by Christopher Ruocchio. Get ready. All right, Jordan here. So as always, let's start with a little bit of context. Demon in White, as I said, is Book 3 in the Sun Eater series. I have reviews of Book 1, Empire of Silence, and Book 2, Howling Dark. You can check those out on this channel. I've already started reading Book 4, Kingdoms of Death, because Christopher Ruocchio was nice enough to give me a review copy. That book is coming out March 22nd, so this week. And we're tentatively planning... by we, I mean Christopher Ruocchio, Jake Bishop, Mike from Mike's Books, and myself. We're hoping to do a spoiler chat on that book here coming up soon. But this book is truly just about as good as a sci-fi book can get. This has everything I love about science fiction. Epic, Marvel-level action scenes, AI, romance, high matter sword duels, robot creatures, godlike alien beings, sorcerers, smoky backroom politics, questions about time and what it means to be a human, and actually a compelling mystery at the heart of this story. So without further ado, let's get into what Demon in White is all about. It's been nearly 80 years since Howling Dark, and Hadrian has been fighting as a knight in the Emperor's service. Hadrian is a new man, progenitor and head of a brand new and separate House Marlowe, complete with a new signet ring and a massive 12-mile-long starship, the Tamerlane, along with a company of 90,000 men. Beyond being a lord and a knight of Victoria, Hadrian now has a reputation as a hero of the Empire. He also has a working relationship with the Emperor himself, in addition to a squire who just so happens to be the Emperor's son. At the start of the book, we learn Hadrian has won a great victory over the Cielcen at the Battle of Aptica, where it is said Hadrian defeated the Cielcen prince Ulurani in single combat. But there are other legends, stories of Hadrian returning from the dead, stories the Empire does not control, true stories. Hadrian denies the legends of his immortality, but even he cannot tamp down the cult of personality that has formed around him. Nevertheless, there are those in the Emperor's Council, led by Lord Augustin Bourbon and Sir Lorcan Brethnac, who feel Hadrian is a threat to the Imperium. They propose a plan to give Hadrian an impossible task, send him on a quest to find 2 lost legions that disappeared on transit to the Outer Rim. If he succeeds, the Empire wins. If he fails, he'll be humiliated and the Empire can dispense with him. Win-win. At the same time, there's a new bad guy in town, Siriani Doriaika, and Hadrian learns that Doriaika has staged an attack on the Legion shipyards above the planet Hermanassa. Doriaika is not like the other clan princes. He, or it, doesn't simply raid border planets for meat and slaves, he picks strategic military targets. Doriaika isn't raiding the Empire, it is at war with the Empire. Enter the Red Company, where Ottavia Corvo is now full captain, and Hadrian's mercenary and gladiator friends Polino, Elara, and Saran have now been uplifted to the patrician class, their youth surgically restored, their lives extended, and they are now full legionary officers. Together with Lorian Aristides, the prince, and Valka, Hadrian's lover, the company sets sail for the planet Gododin, the very planet Hadrian will one day destroy. What follows is an adventure of epic proportions. Hadrian meets new enemies and new foes, and we get to see the Red Company battle like never before. What's more, we get to journey to the heart of the Imperium, where we learn that the answers Hadrian seeks may lie in the hands of the Emperor himself. Because, above it all, this is a book with a mystery at its heart, and that mystery pertains to the quiet. But Hadrian faces seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Not only do the Cielcen seek to do him in, but there are other dangers closer to home, including the Chantry, the Lions, the Empress, and numerous assassins, and even the vacuum of space. This is a story of tightly guarded secrets, of alien ruins, of history and of prophecy, of romance and of destiny. Okay, so I'll leave my synopsis there. Let's get into a little bit of what I liked. And there's so much to like here, guys. By the way, this is a huge hulking tome. I feel like you could really hit someone over the head with this thing. It's just a giant doorstop of a book. Total brick here. But first of all, as I said before, I feel like Demon in White is Christopher Ruocchio's Storm of Swords. In other words, he's not gotten lazy, and book 3 here is easily the best book so far in the series. That's my opinion. The plot is gripping, and the twists and turns are nonstop. The highs and lows in this book are extremely satisfying. There's this classic stress and release pattern, as Ursula Le Guin calls it. You see this pattern in lots of ancient epic stories, and you see it especially in Tolkien, right? In Lord of the Rings, you have the characters go on a dangerous journey and outsmart the Nazgul, and then they stop at a forest glade outside of Woodhall and take a rest. Then you make it through the old forest and battle the killer tree, and there's all this action, and then you get to rest at Tom Bombadil's house, and then you make it past the scary Barrow Wights and finally escape to Bree, and there you get to rest at the Prancing Pony, and you get comic relief, and you get downtime, and then you take another journey, and you end up at Imladris, and you get to hang out with the elves and Bilbo, and so that's what Tolkien does. That's what a lot of epic stories do. Christopher Ruocchio definitely does this here, and he does it really well. Just like Tolkien, also there are actually songs in this book, and so you can kind of see the influence that Tolkien has on the author, especially in the way that Christopher weaves mythology and history and legend. In this particular book, you have the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire and the King Arthur legends and Siddhartha Gautama and the whole Buddha myth with this story. So there's all these different influences weaving into this story. And it feels like Ruocchio is really at the height of his powers. And the story, I would say the story starts to really hit a groove about 15 chapters in, and it just feels almost as if Ruocchio has figured something out about writing that he maybe didn't understand in the first or second books. It's got like TV show plotting, right? Or thriller writer plotting. And I mean that in the best way possible. This story never lets up, but it still has the introspection, the philosophy, the politics, the relationship building that the first two books have. I would say even more, in fact. So let's talk too about where Hadrian is at the start of this book. We really get to see a different Hadrian here. He becomes someone who has much more of a weight on his shoulders. He has real power now, and it feels like he's no longer this boy, right, who is just trying to figure out how to act and where he belongs. In Demon in White, Hadrian knows where he belongs. He belongs in Valka's arms. And you really do get the full flowering of this slow-burning love story with Valka, whom he calls, quote, the icon of some furial goddess left on some cold and distant altar, so tender and bitter, my lady of pain. And he knows, too, don't you just love that? That's Christopher Ruocchio in a nutshell. And the thing is that Hadrian, a little bit like Holden from The Expanse, but even more so because because of all of his accomplishments and because he's the half-mortal, right? Hadrian is becoming something of a legend, right? And the Chantry and other entities are beginning to see Hadrian as a real threat to their authority. And so Hadrian is constantly having to watch his back. And so there's a lot of pressure on him, kind of pressure that we didn't see before. And it's for the first time in this series, in this book, that you get a real meditation on class, power, corruption, rank, and heredity. Well, you get a little bit of that in the first book as well. But the thing is that Hadrian, as I said, is something of a hit. He's something of a hero to the hoi polloi, right? But he's not so much a hit with the nobility, with the upper political and dynastic classes on Forum. To them, he's still an outsider. He's a threat. And Ruocchio plays with the Icarus myth, right? Like Icarus, Hadrian has risen too far, too quickly. He is basically a hero during a time when the Empire doesn't want a hero. And they feel like because of Hadrian, they're losing control of the narrative, and it scares them. And I want to say, too, there's definitely a Macbeth vibe to this story, to be honest. There's this whole element of prophecy. Hadrian's been wondering why, by some miracle or magic, he was saved all those years ago on Vorgossos, Talos and why he's still here. What is his purpose? Will Brethren's prophecies come true? Will Hadrian's visions, which he can't tell the Emperor about, will those come true? Will Hadrian stay with Valka, or will he make... well, I can't give away spoilers. Will he make another decision? That would be too much of a spoiler there. But will the Cielcen unify and unite around one ruler, which would make them super potent and scary? Will they unite with the extras? Will the extras kind of quit their anarchist ways and collectivize, which would be scary as well? Another thing I'll say here is that we get the continued moral development of Hadrian, and I touched on some of this in my Howling Dark review. In past books, Hadrian has flirted with the idea that although the Cielcen are strange and alien and enigmatic, deep down you got the sense through Hadrian that the Cielcen might be honorable, purpose-driven, noble beings, even if we can't fully understand them. Like we knew the Cielcen had done these terrible things, but throughout the series, I would say there really has been a moral equivalency that Hadrian has constantly made. This idea that while the Cielcen are inhuman and scary, there was always a sense in which they were also strangely proud and courageous and fascinating. And I'll say at this point, the rug has been completely pulled out from under us. Not because the Cielcen aren't proud, they are. Not because they aren't fascinating, they are very fascinating, but because of what we see them do in this novel. These creatures are ruthless. They are kamikaze bombing, merciless, bloodthirsty tribal monsters, and Ruocchio really makes that plain in this book, and he also makes it very chilling. At one point, Hadrian marvels at how naive he was, how he had ever thought it would be possible to make peace with these guys. So we have an even more based Hadrian, and for her part, Valka even begins to call the Cielcen barbarians Anariuk, which is an epithet that she used to reserve for humans. On the other hand, it's in this volume 2 that we see Hadrian. We begin to see him in all his flawed humanity, and he does do some questionable deeds. He humiliates himself in a way that few main protagonists ever really do, which is refreshing. I'm happy that Hadrian is no Gary Stu. Let's put it that way. There's also, I would say, a return of this critique that we see throughout the Sun Eater series of techno-utopia, right? This human, all too human wish that we have as beings to live like lotus eaters and to outsource our human tasks and toils to machines and to let technology do everything for us, even allowing them to raise our own children for us so that we become useless, dependent, and we are never really tasting true life with all of its joys and sorrows. And we also see the return and I don't want to spoil anything here, but I'll just say that we see the return of some really exciting story elements, guys, in this book that I didn't think we'd ever see these elements again. There were several, actually, and I want to say that it brought so much joy and happiness to my heart, and it may have even made me cry. I think I can actually tell you vaguely about one. I loved the return of the Colosso and the Gladiator stuff. I won't say anything about it, and this isn't really a spoiler per se, but there is a Gladiator Colosseum style fight scene somewhere in this book that is magnificent, and that also happens to tie into some really important overarching narrative arcs. Remember, guys, I call this a mostly non-spoiler review. And so this is the book where you get to have some of your questions answered, and you get to see a lot of the things that the author has set up come to fruition finally. This book is, I would say, where the planning is really starting to pay off that Ruocchio does. And you really get the sense that the author has a real vision and he knows where he's going with this story. Things, for example, that may have confused you in book 1 or 2 are now paying dividends and making more sense, especially with the Quiet and the Americanii, the Foundation War, the Liberation of Earth, Julian Felsenburgh, Simeon the Red, all of that stuff. You start to learn about this stuff definitely in this book. And you also begin to learn a little bit more about the larger empire in the present, right? Ruocchio uses Prince Alexander as basically a device to show us how the world works, since Alexander is under Hadrian's tutelage. So via their conversations, we get to learn about commerce, which goods can be shipped between the stars and which can't, how the economy works, how the legions are fed. We get to see Forum in the capital city in this book. So there's just so much going on in this one, but none of it's info dumpy. We meet the Emperor. We learn about the Aventine House and the power structure of the Imperium and the Chantry and the Grand Inquisitors and the Imperial Library, which, by the way, is awesome, especially considering what we get to learn there, and I won't say anything about that. But this book basically has just everything you wanted to know. We get a grand tour of these Cielson world-sized ships we've heard so much about, and I love how these things are utterly alien, with the critical systems of the ship and the engines trailing out from behind them like the arms of a jellyfish. The inside the ships, they're carved out with vaulted tunnels like caves with non-Euclidean geometries, and just the sheer, utter alien strangeness of the way that the Cielson live. What is it? Ruocchio says, "The Cielson didn't build," Hadrian remarks, "they burrowed. All our human construction," and this is a direct quote, "our towers, castles, and fortresses, temples and warehouses, even our humble homes, all of them reach toward the heavens. The Cielson dig toward hell." And speaking of ships, there's a great chapter in this book too where Hadrian just takes the reader on a tour of the Tamerlane, his massive 12-mile long dreadnought starship. You get a whole bit on the history of space warfare in this. We even get a lesson in this book on how high matter swords work, which I've always been curious about, and we learn why high matter swords cost more than starships, which is pretty incredible. And how could I forget? We also get to learn where Hadrian is hiding out as he writes his life story as an older man, down to the very room and stool that he's sitting on as he writes it. And we learn the location that he's been stowed away at so that he can write his life story in peace. And there's also a part that is really cool that I want to know more about, where Hadrian explains that even though he wrote his life story as an older man, and he's writing it right now, he actually began trying to write his memoirs during the events that take place in Demon in White. Apparently, he began writing his memoirs and then quit. And so Ruocchio is basically hinting that there is another version of Empire of Silence out there, and maybe some historian will be able to dig it up, or maybe it's languishing in some imperial archive, which makes me think, and I know Ruocchio has hinted at this, that we might be able to get another version of Empire of Silence at some point. And lastly, I'll finish up by saying that as good as Ruocchio is, as well known as he is for writing these character descriptions and these deep, introspective internal monologues, there's also just some terrific space opera writing in this book. This is the first book in the series so far where we get a look at how Ruocchio writes these tense, large-scale space battles on different planets and in space with starships, and you really get the chills at the way he's able to write these large-scale battle scenes. Some of the action scenes in this book reach the level of like Marvel or DC, right? There was one battle, for example, where the Tamerlane is being invaded, and there isn't much time, and so the alarm is going off, whop, 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 and everyone's running around and getting ready, and there's this epic description of the invading ship, and then Ruocchio does this entire chapter where Hadrian has to suit up into his black fighting suit, and it's like the Batman scene. He's like suiting up piece by piece in this epic fashion in front of a mirror while his girlfriend is like, "No, please don't leave me, don't go." It's so classic, and it's so great. And then you get the nervous shuttle ride Hadrian and his soldiers have to take, and then boom, contact, and the doors open to darkness and fog as they arrive at the enemy ship and deploy the mapping drones and get the layout of the place. And then Chapter 22. Chapter 22, man, is one of the most interesting, well-written, exciting chapters of all of Ruocchio's books to this date. And then you get the epic Battle of the Beast. And that is all I'll say, because there's some equally exciting stuff happening at the end, which is really crazy and surreal. And I truly can't tell you anything about the ending because I know I will accidentally spoil something. And then you won't want to read the book. I know I've said before that this book has everything in it, and I seriously mean it. But also, about 40% of the way into this book, there's a whole span of the book where the story develops into this court intrigue, whodunit, murder mystery. There's an attempt on Hadrian's life. Actually, Hadrian is not sure if this person was trying to kill him or Valka, but he has to uncover who's behind it. And is it the prince? Is it Selene? Is it one of the lions? Is it the chantry? Or does the emperor want him dead, right? So there's this whole clue element to the book as well. And I won't say anything more about that because I know I've already said too much already. Okay, let's get into what I didn't like. So there are only really two things I didn't like. I will say, despite this book's evident greatness, it does have a bit of a slow, meandering start. The book really starts to pick up, I would say, around chapter 15, and I know there was a lot of setup that needed to be done, but I feel like it could have been done more efficiently. And lastly, and I hope you don't get mad at me, Christopher, because I know you and I just talked about this, and I know that you find these critiques to be annoying. And I know we talked about this weird cult of originality thing, this modern move to say that everything needs to be completely original and we need to start the clock over at zero French Revolution style. And I know that you are working within a tradition and I respect that, but I gotta say, my what I didn't like segment isn't just about what I didn't like, but as Jake Bishop puts it, and I like this idea, it's also about what I think some other people might take issue with. And I think there are some people who are going to say that this book has a few similarities to Dune that are just too on the nose. I get what you're doing, Christopher, but some people might be turned off by how some of the ideas are just extensions of what Frank Herbert is doing in Dune. So I thought I'd mention some of the similarities so that people can decide for themselves based on what they are interested in. And this part of the video might contain a few spoilers, so if you don't want that, I would say stop viewing now. In this book, we learn about several Dune-related things. The salt mines of Belutia, which is a prison colony, and that definitely reminded me of Salusa Secundus. You have sophisticated battle suits that recycle water, rather like the still suits. There's a heat-seeking, motion-detecting, knife missile seeker thing, just like the hunter-seeker from Dune. So there's a whole scene like that in this book, and sure enough, just like in Dune, someone enters the room just as the thing is about to kill its victim. I won't say who that is. Just like in Dune, when Shadow Mapes enters the room and then the thing gets distracted. In this book, it's the same exact thing. The victim grabs it, smashes it against the wall, just like Paul does with the hunter-seeker. There's even then the security officer, just like Thufir Hawat, who feels bad for letting it happen. In this case, it's Krim. And then it also turns out the assassination plot wasn't meant to succeed, actually, just like in Dune. You have the shaved-headed Cathars in this book. You have a test to see if Hadrian is, quote, human, except in this case, it's set up like a lie detector session with the Chantry. And the procedure, I would say, works a little bit more like a Turing test than any kind of put your hand in the box sort of thing. In this book, you have Hadrian developing the ability to see possible futures. There's this question of whether Hadrian is the God Emperor reborn. There's even a passage in chapter 10 where Hadrian is speaking, he's talking about Uvenari, saying, quote, "It had manipulated me, I know that now, tricked me into giving it a fighting chance, a warrior's death. Its surrender to me in Caliga had been only the desperate gamble of the cornered wolf waiting with its foot in the trap to kill the hunter on his return. The Cielsen only submit when they are beaten, and they do not submit to animals like men." So obviously that just really reminds me of the shout out Mapes, the Reverend Mother, that is, of her speech to Paul about waiting in the trap so that you can kill the person who trapped you when they get back. So this, on top of all the other similarities I have mentioned in my other reviews, all of that stuff might turn some people off. They might feel like it's too similar, too on the nose. I personally know this is Christopher's homage to his favorite scenes and elements in Dune, and I know he's sick of people criticizing his series for this, but I thought I'd mention it in the spirit of honesty and transparency. Okay, so that's it for today. Be sure to hit the subscribe button below. Pick up Demon in White. I think you can probably still get it on hardcover, and I'll put the link in the description below. Get in touch with me on Goodreads, Facebook, and feel free to help us out on Patreon. My next review will be Christopher Ruocchio's book 4 in the Sun Eater series, Kingdoms of Death. I am just all about this series, guys, and I hope you go on the journey with me. Again, looking forward to having a discussion with Christopher, Mike, and Jake. I'll link to their channels below as well. Talk about, do a little spoiler chat on Kingdoms of Death. So that's it. Until next time, peace.